Hello, buddy. Welcome back to Tin Man's Core Channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I've reacted to my second scary storyteller channel, and it's Mr. Haunted. And the video that I picked out to react to this time is 4 True Creepy Forest Stories. So without further ado, I'm going to turn these lights off, move the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction on the road in the bag, shall we? Okay, here we go.
This didn't happen to me, but rather my parents while on their honeymoon during the 80s.
Okay.
And I still get goosebumps whenever my dad tells me about it. About 3 months after my parents had gotten married, they decided to take their honeymoon by going camping for a few days in the Appalachian Mountains in the Northeast. My dad was the type of guy who admired the outdoors, so he was the one setting up the tent and gathering wood for a fire.
Oh, that sounds like a lovely excursion. Instead of spending all your money going to one of them big touristy areas. If you both enjoy the outdoors, just do that. But anyway, let's continue with the story, see what happens next.
The first night into their trip, my mom and dad were around the fire they had built, listening to music while drinking their asses off and just having a good time. At one point, my dad suddenly turns off the radio very quickly and puts his finger to his lips. My mom starts making hand signals to him, asking what was wrong. It was completely dark out and very hard to see, but the light of the fire was enough for my dad to see a tall, shadowy figure standing about 15 feet away from them. He then gives my mom the hint that we need to go inside the tent to give the person the hint that they didn't want to be bothered. Needless to say, they go back inside and my mom falls asleep instantly while my dad stayed awake with his .22. My dad is a pretty big guy, 6'4", and also served 4 years in the military, so he wasn't afraid of anything.
Thank you for your service. But yeah, he's right. Them military guys ain't scared of nothing, since they've seen a lot of creepy stuff while deployed. But if you have to go to bed with your .22 in hand, then he's all shook up. But it'll make you wonder what that tall black figure near the woods was. A person that was stalking them, or a cryptid like a Bigfoot. You never know.
Eventually, he started to get tired and fell asleep, but was immediately woken up by the sound of my mom screaming. There was a massive-sized hole ripped through the tent, and that's when my dad could see someone's face looking at them. My dad then picked up his .22 and shot a few rounds at the man dressed in all black, but he quickly ran off and was never caught.
Okay, it was a man, but that would be creepy to wake up and see a big-sized hole in your tent with a guy staring their face into it. And I'm glad you were able to shoot your firearm near his direction to scare him off. Dang, I thought he was going to nick his face, at least. But the guy moved back so quick. But hopefully that'll give him a sign to not mess with him again. But at this point, I will be telling my wife, hurry up and pack up everything. We're getting out of here now.
My mom and dad then packed up and ran all the way back to the truck and sped off,
That's
leaving
smart.
their belongings behind. The next day, they both had gone back to collect their stuff, only to end up finding that their site had been completely trashed. Holes in the tent, things thrown and kicked, and a large knife laying on the ground that certainly wasn't theirs. My dad then later reported the incident to the ranger station, or the proper authorities, but he wasn't sure what had happened after that. They still wonder what would have happened to them had whoever that was managed to get in their tent successfully.
They probably would have been deleted and you would not be here telling the story. But that is creepy. When they went back to collect the rest of their belongings, the tent was all ripped up. Everything else was kicked around and there was a large knife laying at their campsite in one of theirs. That guy left it there as a little warning. This knife could have been in you, basically. But if you reported it to park rangers, they're just going to check out the area and keep an eye out. They probably won't be too bothered unless they get more reports of this strange guy lurking around other campsites to where they could take it seriously to find him. Which I hope they do, because he don't need to be out there stalking and scaring the crap out of the campers. But thankfully they made it out of there safe and sound. But anyway, let's get to story number 2.
When I was a kid, my parents used to take me to my relative's house in eastern Kentucky to go hunting.
Right?
The closest city is Whitesburg. My uncle had taught me everything about the outdoors and lived in a cabin up in the mountains surrounded by forest in all directions. As a young boy, he and I used to sit out on his back porch at night and use predator calls to try and call something down out of the hills. He and I were out using one of his tapes. We had been out there for a while and hadn't seen anything, so we were planning on going to bed.
Yeah, them recordings of animals in distress really do work, bringing in deer and other animals to you. But you better be careful and be ready to defend yourself if something you haven't seen before pops out of them woods.
We were about to pack everything up when he realized that his squirrel feeder was empty and that he needed to fill it back up with seed. He then walked up the hillside about 25 yards when my aunt came to see as to why we were still outside. The only light out that night was from his porch. He was about 35 yards up the hill and called back saying that he forgot his flashlight. So my aunt went back inside to get one of his spotlights. We had forgotten to turn off the tape with the predator calls, so I turned it off. And that's when I noticed my aunt was stiff as a board. I looked up at her, and she had the spotlight shining straight up to the squirrel feeder where my uncle was. I heard her say something along the lines of, "It's coming toward you, Jim." My uncle turned around, saying, "Huh?" Then, a little louder, she says, "It's coming straight toward you, Jim." That's when I looked up and saw a set of eyes about 15 feet away from where my uncle was standing. It was closing in on him.
Oh, crap. That would be scary if your spouse says, it's coming towards you. But I knew it. You guys are playing them animal calls. It attracted something big coming towards you. At this point, I'd be like, oh, forget this. I'll fill the squirrel feeder tomorrow. I'm out of here.
Whatever it was massive. The eyes were about 4 to 5 feet off the ground, and whatever this creature was, it managed to get the drop on a man who has spent his whole life in the woods studying and tracking predators. My uncle was facing us with his back to the woods, so we told him to freeze. We all just stood there for about 3 minutes, which seemed like a lifetime. It was dead silent. No crickets, no sounds of the night, and it was probably the most creepy 3 minutes of my life. The creature just stayed there at the tree line staring at us, and us staring back at it. The brush of the tree line was thick, so we couldn't see what the shape of it was. Just the eyes in relation to the ground. After those 3 minutes, my uncle slowly turned around to see what was about 15 feet away from him. With our spotlight on it, he was able to look at the creature directly in the eyes, and then it suddenly took off. For the next 10 minutes, we could hear the sounds of limbs cracking and snapping all the way up the side of the mountain as this animal retreated. My uncle was scared, and I had never seen him this scared before. Something else that scared us is that we had been sitting out there all night listening intently and watching that tree line like hawks. Whatever animal or creature that was didn't make a single sound coming down the side of that mountain. It never made a sound until it took off. I didn't get any sleep that night, and neither did my aunt or uncle. Let me say this though. This animal couldn't have been a bear nor a mountain lion. Based on how high the eyes were off the ground, the eyes were too high to be any one of those animals. Till this day, my uncle and I still don't know what animal or creature that was, and my uncle has never seen anything like it before.
Okay, that is creepy that the uncle was able to look at it, but they didn't give any detail of what it looked like and was it covered with fur or not. So I'm going to take a guess here and say it's a Bigfoot, because Bigfoots are known to be sneaky and not make much noise when they're trying to evade contact with humans. But once it was spotted, it didn't care how much noise it made going back up the mountain. Because I know if it was a dog man, them cryptids wouldn't hesitate, and they'll probably attack you in the blink of an eye. While Bigfoots are known to be a little bit more tamer about being around humans. But thank God I just decided to leave and allowed the uncle to get back to the house quick. But my blood pressure would be dropping quick if I saw something big like they're describing.
About 2 years ago, I lived in a rural area in the state of Kentucky.
Okay.
The house I lived in wasn't anything special. It was just a house that was appropriate for one or two people to live in. One day, I was going for a hike on a neat little trail that I had recently discovered near my backyard that was about 5 or 6 miles long. It just so happened to be the perfect length for me, considering the fact that I was in my 50s and couldn't really walk that far. I had brought along a gallon of water with me and a snack if needed. Anyway, as I'm walking down the trail, I, for whatever reason, look to my right and see an old cabin that looked like it had been there for years. This was very strange because I had been living in my house for the past 8 years and never once came across this cabin, not to mention how close it was.
That would be very strange, indeed. Because if you've been living there for years, you would have already known about this cabin being there. And all of a sudden, it showed up. I figured something paranormal is afoot here.
I had my camera with me and took this as an opportunity to get some really cool shots of it. I walk over to the cabin and snap some photos of the inside and the outside. The inside of the cabin was empty, excluding a few beer bottles and other trash. That night when I got home, I was reviewing the pictures I had taken of the cabin on my computer and was going through the photos when one of them caught my eye. Upon closer inspection, I could see what appeared to be an old woman in one of the windows. My heart dropped into the pit of my stomach once I saw what I was looking at. This made absolutely no sense because I didn't see anyone when I was looking around the cabin. I've never believed in the paranormal, but I still have no explanation to my encounter till this day.
Okay, dokie, that's a little creepy. First of all, I figured that you would have found like beer bottles and some other garbage, like because some homeless people probably inhabited it there at one point. But that'd be creepy that if you're taking photos and there's a woman staring at you through the window. I wouldn't know what to think. But I'm just glad that this person did not go in and get attacked by this ghostly woman. But that will be spooky to find in your photos.
I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains of northeast Georgia.
Okay.
It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forests, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places.
I heard Georgia had a lot of that stuff down there in their part of the Appalachian Mountains. Since it's another touristy type state that draw in a bunch of people to visit every year. But anyway, let's continue.
Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor, and while there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live have financial issues. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there too long. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is at Walmart.
Well, for one thing, I definitely don't want to live in that area because if the only job you could get around there is just being like a doctor, lawyer, working at Walmart, I'd be like, well, dadgummit, is there any other place you can work at besides these professions? And plus, I would hate to live in a town that just has a bunch of commercialism brought into it to where this type of jobs will be only hiring certain skilled people and exclude all the people that are just really looking for work, which is just sad nowadays to think about.
To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it could be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. Sometimes there are really shifty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see these old beat up $500 cars just barreling along the roads meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you'd see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All of that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, two of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the National Forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles into the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something like that had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late.
That sounds like a cool adventure to have. Go up in Appalachian area just to do a paintball tournament with your buddies. But then that would be sad that when you get to a camp spot that you guys know it's already occupied by a whole church group. Well, they got there first. You got to make do somewhere else. Like find a nice spot in the woods that's cleared out enough for all you guys to camp around in and leave the next day.
Anyway, we decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods, and by this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had our GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service Rangers used a backhoe to block the road off with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night. As we were setting up the tent, I start to notice that there's a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time and just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here.
Oh, that makes me pissed every time people do that. Like, nature is not your way of dumping your trash quick and easily. You'll be poisoning the earth instead of taking them to a landfill, or if it's plastics, you can recycle those. Or it might have been some people that were squatting in that area before and they just left all their garbage behind.
However, none of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping their garbage in an area that is more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made some chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m., and as we're eating, we noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was the moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you'd see over a bright city, but we couldn't see the light source itself. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided that it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look.
I don't know if you should do that or not. If you can't find the source of that light, it's probably not coming from a flashlight or headlamp or some other electric light source. I guarantee you it's probably a ghost light that you definitely need to stay away from.
My other friend, Isaac, decides to stay behind and pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking toward the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought that it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seemed strange that a beaver would go around all these trees just to knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I start talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh crap," A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We both look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what that light was after all.
Exactly. If it went out, get back to your campsite. But that is very sketchy that you find trees with bark chewed off of them in a circle.
We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlights and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I could see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before, and for some reason, he's carrying around his paintball gun around his hand. That seemed a little odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we'd probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to use the restroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. Then, all of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. We ask him why he kept wandering around our campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They're locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it?
Oh, that is spooky. Because I'd be wondering too, why in the world would your friend be walking around with just a paintball gun? But then you see him at the camp, and he said all the paintball guns are locked up in the truck. Very creepy.
We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling into the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I ask. I was watching a movie on my phone. Then I fell asleep, I guess. But you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? Isaac said that he had been in the tent since we left, and that he'd been wearing the same jacket all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent. We just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything in it. We jump into the F-150 and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been laying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand. By this point, all of us have sobered up the situation and no one wants to get out of the car to try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard in front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off because it must have been balanced on top, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but thankfully it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following with us with its lights turned off. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service Road, and the other vehicle.
Oh, heck no, this ain't no ghost activity. I misread that whole situation. There's an actual person stalking you guys, and now they want to follow you. Hit the pedal to the metal and get out of there.
It doesn't get any closer though. It just stays out one or two turns behind us, and we could only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along the gravel roads, we make it back to the main road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that middle barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again.
There ain't no need going back there. There had to be some people planning on robbing you. But since you saw their light and one of the guys walking around with a weapon and decided to leave, the whole situation changed. But thankfully they got out of there and was able to knock that guard down so they can get out of there. But you always got to be careful when you park in rural areas that are not officially known campsites, because you never know what would happen to you out there. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those post notifications for more Mr. Haunted related content like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man Score channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and that's a wrap, and have a nice day.